Thank you, choir. Thank you, Jane. Thank you to the Tannenbaum Ahmed family for helping us out today as well. Now we're going to do some Lectio Divina. If you haven't done this process, it can be a more involved process. I will give you the shorthand for today. It involves hearing a story once, or reading a story once, and listening for understanding. Who, what, where, when, why, how. I think we have most of that covered at this point. Then you listen again, and you listen a little deeper, and you ask, where am I in this story? What is speaking to me from this story? What is jumping out to me? Are there words, phrases, symbols, songs that come to mind? So I invite you to take a moment and think about the story of the rededication of the temple and what it means for us, for you. Where am I in that story? What message do you receive? Is it the importance of religious freedom? Is it the victory of the scrappy underdogs against the mighty empire? Is it the miracle of the oil? Then we're invited to make connections to our world today. Are there parallels to our political process today? Figures who seem similar? Does it make you ask questions about God, about religious community, about being human? Is there some divine action at work in the story? If so, where? If not, why? And then the final step is if you received a message or a gift from this Lectio Divina process, if you have come to some new insight, the question is, what do I do with that now? How do I share that with the world? How do I share that with community? I want to share the story of Hanukkah, but one, because I think it's an incredible story. I find it very fascinating. I think it's important to lift up the faiths in the room, the traditions in the room. Not all UU congregations look like ours. And so I think we have a special opportunity and a special challenge to speak to all of that. So for us today, in our Lectio Divina process, I wonder if we might focus on the miracles in this story. There are a few. Neskadal Hayasham is the Hebrew phrase that's inscribed on the dreidel. If you've ever seen a dreidel, it spins. It has 4 Hebrew letters. Phrase that means a great miracle happened there, referring to Jerusalem and the temple. So what does the word miracle mean to us? What does it mean to you? Is it about God? Is it about the symbolism of light and dark? Is it about the resilience of the Maccabees? Is it about the beauty of the menorah shining in homes across the world? And what does it mean to Jewish folks? And are the meanings different? That's what I'm wondering today. About how we are in community here in a UU congregation versus a congregation that has one faith identity. Because I think that they are different. So I'm wondering, what does it mean for us today? Where do we find ourselves in this story? We draw from many sources here in UU congregations, one of which is Jewish teachings that call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. A deep part of our tradition. But where does learning from that teaching and practicing rituals go from appreciation and learning to appropriation? That's what I've been pondering this week. A sticky question for any congregation, and I think that it requires power dynamic analysis. It's a big word, but it basically means that we would love to believe that everything is equal all the time. But things are not always treated equally. Things are not always weighted equally in our world. You hear this story, and what jumps out at you about the history is that the Maccabees are a group of oppressed minority freedom fighters. But depending on your point of view today, you could also see them as violent, conservative, religious zealots who started a civil war. You could see the Seleucids, Antiochus Epiphanes, as cosmopolitan, powerful, rich Hellenizers, or an oppressive and theocratic regime. So regardless of how we remember them, there is a historical reality to how we view this. This was not an equal fight, in other words. Right? One is an empire, one is a small band of fighters. It's not apples to apples. I often make that mistake when looking back. And it's important to remember. We want stories that talk about justice and equality. We seek to hold justice and equality together. But justice is not always simply about equality. Jewish people have a long history of oppression, attempted annihilation. For millennia, there's something called genetic trauma, generational trauma. It is a real thing that has physiological effects, religious effects. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Cossacks, Stalinists, Nazis, white nationalists, the list goes on. People's DNA is affected by history. Emotional pain that is passed down becomes scientific fact. I recently read a story that broke my heart in preparing for this about a Jewish Brooklyn grandma. When 9/11 happened, she started packing her bags. And the grandchild said, Grandma, what are you doing? She said, they're going to blame us for this. We have to be ready to run. That kind of trauma that gets re-inflicted in today's political situation cannot be overstated. That it is not simply the wild, fringe conspiracy theorists. That it's more baked in than that. So for me, it is important to name that Christians have often been the perpetrators. That anti-Semitism runs so deep in a reading of Christianity that has formed bad theology that kills people. That we were not always on the right side of history. We being Christians, we being Unitarians and Universalists. Not simply about anti-Semitism, but about civil rights in America, the abolition movement, women's rights. We have not always been on the right side of history. The theology that helped enable the rise of Nazi Germany, the so-called confessing churches in Germany, who, like the other Jews in the story of Hanukkah, kind of went along with the program of the empire. Kind of okay with it. The theology that enables the rise of Trumpism, where white evangelicals gave up their morality in favor of racism and cruelty towards immigrants. Bad theology by so-called Christians, by so-called anyone, kills people. We have to hold that in tension. We have to talk about that. And that's why I think that specifically in explicitly Christian communities, practicing Jewish rituals, like lighting the menorah, is deeply problematic. It makes me wildly uncomfortable. In parlance, the common parlance, it is not cool, y'all. Unless I think you are specifically invited or in a relationship in an act of solidarity. That there's some kind of community response and some kind of communal connection. I think that's where it's appropriate. But there's simply too much history and not enough repentance. Not enough naming of the hurts, not enough apologizing, not enough saying the truth. I feel like you have to apologize for your role and vow to do better in the name of your ancestors. Because if genetic trauma is real, I think so is genetic responsibility. I think that's solidarity. I think that's respect. I think that's learning from history. So now, we sang a song for our kids, and we usually sing a song called Go Now in Peace. It's a lovely little song. The kids love it. I love it. Here's the thing. It was written by a Methodist woman, I believe her name is Natalie Sleeth, who stipulated that the lyrics to her song that she wrote could not be changed to be printed in our hymnal. So if you take out your hymnal, you don't have to do this, but if you looked in your hymnal, you would see that the lyrics are different in the hymnal than what we sing. That we sing, may the spirit of love surround you. Now it was a Methodist woman who said the lyrics are, may the love of God surround you. Echoing our source that tasks us with responding to God's love by loving our neighbor as ourselves. We changed them to sing it here. We're not the only ones who do this. Many UU congregations do this. I don't know when, I don't know how, but it makes me a little uncomfortable. I think it's appropriation. To be clear, Christian churches lighting the menorah and us changing the words to Go Now in Peace are not equal, but I think they are both forms of appropriation, which we UUs often do often. Mostly unintentionally, mostly with the best of intentions in trying to live out our living tradition. We draw from many sources, yes, but I believe that we ought to do so when we are invited, when we are in relation, when we are in connection with people for whom that is their identity. For example, I'm not Jewish. I won't light the menorah unless I'm invited to do by someone, or unless someone accepts my invitation to come and do it together. I think that's the beauty of a UU community, that we have these different voices, these different traditions in the room, and that all are to be lifted up, but not like Antiochus Epiphanes, to do it in my way. I don't care how you feel about it. I'm going to do it my way. So that's where I am on this. I'm not sure that we should appropriate Christian symbols without context or relationship. Luckily for us, we have Christians in this room. I don't think we should appropriate Jewish ritual without invitations. We have folks who are Jewish in this room. So, what does that mean for us? I think it means we can learn. We can remember. We can be in solidarity. We can talk about Hanukkah, remember, and do better. I think that's our responsibility. I think it's part of being human to learn to be religiously literate and to lift up the faiths of our neighbors in this space. So the miracles of Hanukkah, no matter where you are on miracles, no matter where you are on divine action, God who moves in the world, the Maccabees saw this as divinely inspired and ordained. They believed in the power of God as well as the love of God, as do Christians, as do Muslims, as do Baha'i, as do so many others. But no one has the definition of God. No one has a monopoly on what that definition is. No one gets to tell you how to worship, how to understand. No one can take it or give it to you without being in relation, but I think we can ask others not to take our definition of God without permission. Can we agree on that? So, to finish, it seems that we have a choice here. We need to ponder and ask in the Lectio Divina style. Can we do translation here? Can we hear the story of the miracle of the oil and translate it for ourselves, find ourselves in that story, ask what it means for me today? Can we hear a song, "May the love of God surround you everywhere you go," and translate it into a way that speaks to our own understanding. For those who are Jewish, should we incorporate rituals like the menorah? Should we incorporate traditions like the dreidel and latkes, which I am very pro-tradition? And how do we do it in a way that's authentic and relational? So for me, I refuse to give up the awe that I feel from these stories. I do not think they should be abandoned. I think we need to do our best to engage, to learn, to be in relationship with one another, to lift up our broad and deep tradition, whether the oil stay lit for 8 nights or not. The tradition that comes from it is good and sacred and holy. It informs our people. It feeds our people. And that is what is needed in our world today. A little more community, a little more holiness, a little more awe. So here's the invitation. Imagine a place, a holy place, where all parts of a deep and broad living tradition are lifted up, where celebrating all the voices in the room is the norm, where singing each other's songs when invited and in relationship is what it means to be a community, where we all find meaning in each other's stories, and we honor the place from which they come. We fall deeper into community when menorahs are lit, crosses recognized, prayers spoken and sung, humanist conscience honored and proclaimed, the earth remembered and cared for, and all that is translated to each one of us in a language that speaks to our hearts, so the language is no longer a barrier, whether we sing in Hebrew or in English. To remember a holy space that was cleansed and made whole. To me, that would be an act of rededication, an act of restoration. To heal wounds from our religious traditions, both personal and historical. To heal wounds from interpersonal conflicts here in this room. That's what I hear when I receive the gift of the light that stayed lit. An act of restoration. Friends, I think we need a little restoration, not just here, but in our world. So imagine if we could live out that promise here in this tiny space, with the denomination looking on, looking for someone to lead us in it. I think that we can do that. I think that we must do that we must build a world with love. We must proclaim that the love of God surrounds us everywhere we go. So imagine all of that lifted up. Wouldn't that be a miracle worth sharing? May it be so. Amen.